Good morning and welcome to the Equity in Motion Summit hosted by the New York City Department of Transportation. I am so thrilled to see you all. My name is Julie Biro and I am DOT's Chief Strategy Officer and I'm pleased to be your host throughout the day. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our summit, both of those of you who are in the room and also out in the live stream, and a special welcome to those of you, many of who have traveled pretty far to get here. Welcome to New York. Today, we're excited to create a space with you to exchange best practices, to center equity in planning transportation projects, establish partnerships, and develop actionable takeaways to put theory into practice. In this opening plenary, we are focused on creating a shared understanding of the meaning of transportation equity. What does it mean to strive for or achieve equity? How do we holistically consider policy frameworks, community engagement processes, and service delivery to create access and belonging? What considerations should we make for designs that honor and reflect the needs of the diverse communities that we serve? How do we normalize equity considerations in our work and operationalize equity within our organizations? To begin this conversation with opening remarks, I would like to now introduce our Commissioner, New York City DOT Commissioner Ydanis Rodriguez.
Well, I think that I'm the perfect candidate to speak about equity because I'm the face of community that I've been fighting for equity my whole life. Since I arrived here at the age of 18, where I was speaking the language, washing dishes, living still in the east part of Broadway, where most working class people live in England. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be part of this great conversation. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to New York City DOT's first ever Equity in Motion Summit. Today marks a significant milestone as we come together to explore the importance of equity in transportation and urban planning. I want to begin by thanking the many distinguished speakers, and I will not make the mistake naming anyone because you are so many here today. And guests who have joined us today. Whether you are in the construction, private sector, technology, academia, advocacy, or our fellow public servants, today is both a celebration of the great work that we have all done to advance equity and a call to action because we all know we still can do much more. Right, Joe? I also want to acknowledge all of you panel moderators who took extra time and explore an effort to prepare for today. We are all VIPs, and I hope to thank you each in person today. Before I talk about the data ahead of us, I want to do a quick overview and share all that we have done and are doing as a whole city to advance equity in transportation at New York City Department of Transportation under the leadership of the great Mayor Eric Adams. You can see the incredible complexity of New York City DOT, 800 bridges and tunnels, 44,000 intersections, signals. It's a lot of work that we got to do in order to be sure that the 350 square mile that we have in our city is a place to move goods and people. As many of you know, I'm the first Latino American commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation. And the other brother who was a person of color only hold the job for a few months. And I don't celebrate that. The fact that we only have two is a challenge that we have and we need to address. I entered this role after a career of public service where equity and social justice were always central to my life. I came to New York City from the Dominican Republic as a teenager and was once an activist student at a school hosting us today, CUNY, where I probably got a BA and master's degree from City College. I lead a great immigrant story, the same story of Irish, Jewish, Caucasian, Black, and Latino, using my degrees to teach in New York City public schools, including being a co-founder of Gregorio Luperón High School, the first school created in New York City in 1992 under Chancellor Fernandez to serve newcoming students from Latin America. I then moved into elected office. Of course, I lost twice before being elected. I was a council member for 12 years. All the 12 years I was a member of the Transportation Committee. In the last 8 years, I was the chairman of the Transportation Committee. But I never forgot where I started. To make it through CUNY, I washed dishes. I made great sandwich, turkey, bacon, and cheese. At 55 Water Street in New York City, from where now I lead the great New York City Department of Transportation, composed by almost 6,000 men and women. A big applause to all of them who do a great job. I also work as a taxi driver, navigating the various streets that I now have the important responsibility to overseeing as DOT Commissioner, overseeing world-famous public spaces like Times Square and the Brooklyn Bridge. As a commissioner of this agency, I want to change the way New Yorkers and visitors think about our streets. Streets make up 27% of the land in our city. And for too long, our streets have been dedicated to just one use, the movements and storage of vehicles. We are changing that. The majority of New Yorkers do not own a car. Only 1.8 million New Yorkers own a car. Most New Yorkers rely on public transportation, right, David? So we need to invest more in the trains and our buses. And our streets are public space. This public space should serve the need of all New Yorkers. That's why Mayor Eric Adams and I are committed to making a street that benefits every single New Yorker and visitor. A street that are safer for cyclists, a street that improve both services, and a street that remember that the number of motor transportation in this city is being, you know what? A pedestrian. We also believe that our streets should be inviting places for people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds to access safe community space, economic opportunity, cultural vitality, and so much more. Our work in pursuit of these goals is allowing us to better connect community from different social, economic, and ethnic backgrounds. When we transform our street into dynamic public spaces, special things are possible. For example, it would have been impossible 30 years ago for a pop-up concert of 40,000 people to have happened in the old traffic clock Times Square. But that's what Shakira did just a few weeks ago in the incredible Times Square Plaza. As demand for pedestrian space increases, New York City DOT is responding in creative ways by transforming other public space, always with an eye toward equity. What started as the first plaza on the Bloomberg and Janelle as a commissioner, the first one in Times Square, has increased now to almost 100 plazas in New York City. The COVID-19 pandemic caused us to reimagine restaurants in our city. New Yorkers and visitors, they were looking for a space where to eat with the distance that was required during COVID. And that's how we started launching the outdoor dining program. Restaurants were able to establish outdoor setups in portions of our roadway. It saved 100,000 jobs when 12,000 restaurants used the roadway to expand the structure of the dining out. Last year, Mayor Eric Adams, the City Council, DOT, and the restaurant community made this initiative permanent through our Dining Out NYC, the largest and the best outdoor dining out program in the whole country. The pandemic also caused us to think about how to expand our network of over 200 neighborhood-controlled open streets, supporting community organizations in every single corner of our city who are bringing a street to life. Our streets are our collective front yard, and open streets make them safe, multi-use locations. Open streets become places for recreation, entertainment, wellness, art, and so much more. On select summer weekends, we expand DOT's signature program, Summer Street, closing all portions of the street and bring them to life with recreation and other activities. Again, what used to be 7 miles of Summer Street, from 100 Central Street to 79th Street. Last year, on the Mayor Adams night, it was expanded to the heart of Harlem and also to each single borough. We moved those numbers from 7 miles to 22 miles. We also began great new tradition of other holiday street, celebrating our Trick or Treat, reimagining a street for Halloween night and the legendary Fifth Avenue for winter holiday. And the real estate in the business community love that we close Fifth Avenue because in the 2 years, they have seen an increase of sales in those locations. So closing the street for pedestrians to have a space to walk at Fifth Avenue is good for our economy too. We are using our investment in a data-driven way, including by looking at specifically at communities that have been historically under investments. In these priority investment areas, we use data to decide where to repave and make the kind of street and safety improvements like this one in the Bronx that we know will save lives. All the work that we have done in New York City in our street has helped us to get 2023 the year where we had the lowest number of pedestrian fatalities since we started collecting data 113 years ago. Thank you, Eric Victor, and the whole team overseen by Margaret for joining my first Deputy Commissioner on operation for the great job that they do. They are doing amazing work. And that's, happening at the same time when the USA is having the higher numbers of pedestrian fatalities since the 1980s. Here in New York City, we declare intersections as sacred places, and this investment that we are doing is already proving that we can get to Vision Zero. We're bringing the zero, the death in our street for pedestrians and cyclists. And we are engaging communities in new creative ways in critical projects like the Cross Bronx Expressway and the BQE, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. We are envisioning how we can reconnect community long divided by these Robert Moses era highways. We are able to do so because we have gotten such important federal funding from U.S. DOT to make neighborhoods safer, greener, and more community-oriented. Thank you, Joe, and the whole team for U.S. DOT. We are also engaging communities as we expand access to the waterfront in a network of greenways that provide healthy access to pedestrians and cyclists, but have in the past too often skipped over the working class communities in our city. Again, thank you to our U.S. DOT partner here today for helping us help these communities to thrive. Our commitment to equity is not only related to community engagement and project delivery, but also the business that we interacted with. In 2022 and 2023, we hosted the first and second annual Doing Business with DOT events, where hundreds of New Yorkers from the NWBE were invited to look at opportunity to do business with DOT. Because of the great support that we have from Mayor Ydanis and the City Chief Business Diversity Officer, Michael Gardner. Please stand up. I want everyone to know he's the guy who helped us. I got to DOT. I hold DOT accountable for so many years, asking the question, tell me about the NWBE. We never moved up to 11% of NWBE. By this time, the MWBE at DOT has moved from 11% to 24% in 2 years and a half. By investing in equity and diversity, it's more than just who we contract with. It's also workforce we build and the leadership team that guide our direction. My goal is to make New York City DOT an agency that reflects the city of New York. We have made so much progress that last year we reached an all-time high for the number of people of color serving in senior staff roles at the agency. We are very proud of this accomplishment, but there's a lot of more work that we got to do. Finally, tomorrow, Saturday, April 20, will be the biggest ever Car-Free Earth Day in New York City. Car-Free Earth Day is an annual celebration where selected streets go car-free to promote activism and education around the climate change and sustainability and other topics. It also gives the opportunity for New Yorkers to explore, to live that experience on how an open street can look like if they select to make one of the blocks close to where they need as an open street. By the way, I started Car-Free Day in 2016 as a council member. First time I was only able to close 2 blocks in front of my office. Now Car-Free Day in Northern Manhattan goes San Nicolas Avenue from 181st to 190, Dyckman from Broadway to La Marina, Broadway from 14th Street to 46th Street, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Each borough get to celebrate Car-Free Day. I look forward to seeing all of you out there tomorrow so that I also can join the possibility that I'm probably going to be riding by with our great Mayor Eric Adams tomorrow as we're going to be, again, doing our Car-Free Earth Day tomorrow. Now, I'm excited to join our exceptional lineup of speakers and section today. We are going to have conversations that will explore the fundamental dimensions of transportation equity and will allow all of us to both share and learn. We will define transportation equity in our opening plenary and envision a more just future in our closing section. That will be a great legacy for the present and future generation. In between, each plenary today will be tailored to provoke meaningful dialogue and inspire solutions that are actionable. Throughout the day, our esteemed facilitators and moderators will lead discussion on advancing accessibility infrastructure, reimagining public spaces, navigating urban landscapes, engaging communities, promoting worker justice, and building resilient cities. Our program showcases a diverse range of perspectives, ensuring that voices from all sectors and backgrounds are heard and valued. We want today to serve as an opportunity for new ideas as well as new partnerships and relationships to develop at the local, national, and global level. I encourage you to actively participate in the section today. Share your insights, collaborate with your fellow attendees to generate innovative ideas and strategy. Together, we can create transportation systems and urban environments that are equitable, safer, inclusive, accessible for all, not to leave any group out. I extended my heartfelt gratitude to our planning committee for their tireless efforts in curating these dynamic summits. Let me name a few of them, and I want them to please either stand up or wave to be acknowledged. From New York City DOT, I want to thank Julie Barrow, Paola Ruiz, Greta Suarez, Stefan de Jesus, among many others, including my great chief of staff, Ryan Lynch, who also together with my executive team have done a great job to put this summit together. Thank you, guys. I also like to thank Michelle Mingue. Happy birthday, Michelle, wherever you are. You're celebrating your birthday here with us. From M&M Strategies who helped plan and organize these events from the beginning. And I'd like to express my appreciation for our sponsors, Bank New York, Atkins Realist, Autonomous, the Times Square Alliance, and HNTB. Thank you guys for being the first sponsor. We're hoping to see you next year and many others too. I'm looking forward to the rich exchange of ideas and experience that will unfold throughout the day and for this to become an annual tradition. It is now my distinct honor to introduce my brother, the Executive Vice Chancellor Hector Batista of CUNY, our host for today's event. Thank you, Executive Vice Chancellor Batista, for giving us the opportunity to hold this summit today at CUNY. I know Hector has personally spent so many years of his illustrious career dedicated to our generation. Before being now the Vice Chancellor, he used to be the Executive Director of Big Brother, Big Sister. So we are especially proud to have CUNY students as part of our event activations. They are here in the true spirit of the day. They will be showcasing their outstanding work as future leaders who are already dedicated to advancing transportation. Gracias a todos, tengan buen día y a hablar sobre la transportación y cómo podemos mejorarla. Thank you. Héctor Batista.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Good to see everybody. I am really honored to be here representing our 420,000 students at CUNY, 25 campuses across this, and about 42,000 employees. As the Chief Operating Officer at CUNY, I get the pleasure to really get a chance to see the potential of some of our students as I travel and I visit some of our campuses, and I get a chance to really see some of the things that we're doing. We're building future leaders here in New York. But today, really, I want to first of all congratulate Commissioner, mi hermano, el comisionado Ydanis Rodriguez. I would say this about Ydanis, that it is very hard to say no to him. You know, when I was running, I've had the pleasure of being a commissioner in housing, and I've had I'm being blessed by God that have a very diverse career. And, when I went into the not-for-profit sector, I just got to digress a little bit, I met Ydanis. We didn't really know each other that well, but we got to meet when I was running Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And he's always been an advocate for transportation. So I was running Big Brothers. He says, I need you to be a sponsor for our Earth Day. And I'm like, Ydanis, we're a mentoring organization. How does that, what is the connection? Oh, no, I need you to be a sponsor. You can get, the students. So we started working together in this space when even I was running an agency that really was working to lift young people. There were single-parent households. And he's always been a champion for equity. I know because of some of the work he's been able to do. But let me just share something. One of the things we love about our students is their ability to freedom of speech and express themselves and be able to, just be a voice. Ydanis was one of those leaders. I mean, when he was at City College, I hear stories about Ydanis. I won't share those stories. About walkouts and protests, and so he's always been a person who's really always championed equity. I want to thank all those 200 leaders that are here today. A shout out to the amazing DOT staff for all you do. You know, I'm one of those, one of those drivers. So, I'm one of those people that cause you problems sometimes. And so I appreciate all the work that you do. And I would tell you that Ydanis and I have some really, when we have these dinners, have these conversations connected to bike lanes and things along those lines. I am supportive. I have a bike and all that. But, try to make sure that he understands there's, trying to create a sort of a balance. But I want to today sort of recognize two of our students that come from City College, Joada Pollack and Tyler Ortiz. Are they here? Why don't you stand up? This is what I get up every morning and I do. This job is a tough job. Every day we got all kinds of things, demonstrations, all kinds of challenges, systems that are not working in one of the campuses. As the chief operating officer, I don't get thanked when things are working right. I get criticized for they don't work right. They don't work right. So every single day I'm dealing with these challenges. But it's these young people, these students, the future leaders that really sort of inspire me to do the work that I do. The project is an intersection of urban mobility and equity. Tyler's project explores innovative solutions for enhancing navigation in urban settings. These are bright young minds who are doing great things and are really getting an opportunity to really, these are student scholars. And again, let's give them another round of applause because just meeting these two young people, I go back now to my office kind of all fired up because that's really what this job is all about. CUNY tries to, really focus on make sure that we're lifting our students, to try to give them a first-rate education, to lift them from where they are, and because of that, we have 11 of the top 20 schools in the nation when it comes to upper mobility, Baruch being number one. So here in New York City, we have 11 of those schools. So we're very proud of the work that we do here at CUNY. And at the forefront is always making sure that we equity. And today, because it's equity in transportation, we do a lot of work around this space. There's a lot of work that's being done right now at City College. Work connected to transportation. I know that we have an amazing engineering program at City College that we're sort of very proud of, and all that is really focused on making sure that our students find ways to contribute to New York City in a real positive way, and a lot of those areas is really trying to figure out a way to connect them to the interconnected. To the university's work around social mobility, around creating opportunities that will continue to not only lift New York City, the state, but also the country. And at the forefront is some of the work that we do connected to sustainability and transportation options. CUNY is contributing to improving our transportation. The university is working system-wide to bolster electrical vehicles. My goal is that by the time I leave this position, that all our vehicles will be electric. Right? We're working on putting solar panels on some of our parking lots. We're looking at putting solar panels on some of our roofs because we think that is a way for us to do our part. We have a mandate by both the mayor and the governor to meet our by 2025 to meet our goal. In terms of that, and the way to do it is to improve our fleet. Our goal is to by the year 2030 that all our vehicles will be electric. At a time when we have some financial challenges, but I think that there is ways for us to navigate both of those things as we're sort of dealing with those financial challenges. We also are supporting research and smart use electrical vehicles to support power grids. on the development of better batteries through the work, the CUNY Smart Grid interdependency laboratories at City College. We've also established programs to really support and maintain EV vehicles. One example of this is the work that's being done at Browns Community College and the Automotive and Technology Program as a system, whether through research, academic programs, workforce training. Our goal is to continue to really find career paths for our students with a growing market, and this is a growing market. It's the way of the future. So our goal is to make sure that we continue to remain and be focused on that. This university is really focused on not only building the future leaders, as I stated earlier, but really making sure that those future leaders have a path to careers and opportunities. We're very proud today to host you here at our graduate center, where we have a lot of our PhD students. But for me, on a personal note, I'm always sort of very proud to stand as a Dominican. Who would have thought that this local kid from Brooklyn will one day be able to lead this amazing university as the Chief Operating Officer? So I'm always very proud of that. I'm always very proud to try to really create the path forward and try to really be at the forefront of making sure that once you get there, I mean, one thing is to get there. The next thing is what are you going to do to make sure that not only you leave a legacy, but also you create a path. And so that's what I'm trying to do every single day. I want to thank you. I want you to enjoy today's conference. I'm sure it's going to be great. I actually have to run and try to continue to run this university, but I really thank you for inviting me. I can't say no to this man, so enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. We're really thrilled to partner with this incredible public institution today. A couple quick housekeeping notes. First, please note that the QR code on the back of your name tag gives you direct access to the program, so if you need that at any point of the day, it's right there for you. The session panels will all be on this level, and we'll be going up to the 8th floor for both lunch and the reception, and we'll hope you'll stay all day and celebrate with us at the end of the day. Thanks so much again to HNTB for sponsoring our reception. For access to the CUNY Wi-Fi, in case there's so many of us using our cell phones that you need a little boost, the network is GC Guest, and the password is your email address. And finally, should you have require any accessibility accommodations and you've not yet been connected to our accessibility coordinator, please don't hesitate to ask anyone with a DOT PIN on. They will be very happy to assist. I really want to extend my thanks also to Commissioner Mermelstein and the Mayor's Office of International Affairs. You've really helped us to give a warm welcome to the global community for this event today. Thank you. At DOT, we're so grateful for the friendship of United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for Street Safety, Jean Tho. The Special Envoy is a custodian of certain UN conventions and agreements charged with stabilizing and reducing road traffic deaths around the world. Mr. Tho has served in this role since 2015. Please help me to welcome United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for Street Safety, Jean Tho.
Thank you. Good morning. Commissioner Rodriguez, Commissioner Mermelstein, ladies, gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm honored this morning to join you at the Equity in Motion Summit, and I thank the New York Department of Transportation for organizing this important event. Every individual, regardless of their circumstances, deserves the right to travel safely and efficiently. This core principle is fixed in the Sustainable Development Goals 11.2, which calls on governments to provide access to safe, affordable, accessible and sustainable transport system for all, with special attention to needs of those in vulnerable situations. In my capacity as the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for Road Safety, I have traveled to close to 100 countries and have seen firsthand the challenges we face in achieving transportation equity. Whether in high-income or low-income countries, both the statistics and the trends show that it is the poorest communities that suffer the highest road deaths and injuries. In most low- and middle-income countries, people travel on two-wheelers or travel by foot because these are among the cheapest ways to commute. As you probably all know, it is cyclists and pedestrians who have the highest unprotected exposure to vehicular traffic and related road crashes. And even so, we know these vulnerable road users account for half of the 1.2 million road deaths which occur globally each year. The most recent WHO Global Status Report on Road Safety reveals that nearly 80% of road assets do not meet minimum safety standards for pedestrians. My mission as the UN Secretary General Special Envoy on Road Safety is to stress the importance of safety as a key to achieving equity for all road users. It is a global vision for road safety that focuses on tailoring measures to the unique needs of underserved communities, leverage data, community engagement, and investment to prevent traffic fatalities and serious injuries. Raising awareness is also key thanks to global campaigns such as the one of the United Nations GCDECO, one for road safety, supported by 14 global celebrities to be displayed in 80 countries and more than 1,000 cities in the next month. And I'm very happy that it will be launched in New York next July this year. In the United States, there are nearly 50,000 deaths due to road crashes, and $340 billion are spent connected to this. Here in New York City, you face your own set of challenges. With 2 people dying on the road in the city every day, road crashes are affecting communities across the 5 boroughs. That is not acceptable, as we all agree. Furthermore, cities are faced with many challenges, including increasing levels of traffic congestion, greenhouse gas emissions, air and noise pollution. The transport sector contributes roughly 1/4 of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. Globally, air pollution kills about 7 million people annually. A large number of these premature deaths can be traced to pollution from vehicular traffic. I appreciate the effort of Mayor Adams and Commissioner Rodriguez in enhancing safety and sustainability in New York City, including your initiative of redesigning streets, expanding access to sustainable transportation, and improving safety measures. I understand that the city has enough miles of dedicated cycling space to span the entire East Coast, and that in 2023, your Vision Zero initiative broke the record for most miles of protected bike lines installed in 1 year, totaling almost 300 miles of them. Congratulations for that. I've also seen innovative approaches in places like in Basque Country in Spain that successfully implemented car-free areas and non-motorized transport policies, which put pedestrian and cyclist safety at the forefront of the mobility reforms. 45 streets were closed off for use only by pedestrians and cyclists, and trams were added. It cost the Spanish government €5 million. In addition to safety benefits, there was a clear decrease in CO2 and noise emissions, car flow reduced, and acceptance by citizens was high at a rating of 7.4 out of 10. With financing from the UN Road Safety Fund, I've also seen similar non-motorized transport policies in countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Kenya. There is an increasing effort around the world to build safe sidewalks and cycle paths along new roads. To hold cars, free days, and pedestrian-centered initiatives, such as with Nairobi's pedestrian street and Kigali's increased pedestrian and cycling paths. In the face of global challenges such as the climate change, the ongoing current conflicts and disruptions to shipping lanes, the recent G7 statement underscored the urgent need for resiliency and cooperation among nations. We must prioritize in every city in the world robust, inclusive and adaptable mobility systems to protect our economies and societies from potential shocks. Ensuring connectivity and early warning system for road safety for all is key to build resilience for the people, the planet and the growth. The message that I would like to leave you with here today is of New York City's responsibility as an example to the world. New York City is a worldwide shop window and has a responsibility to set the pace for other cities on safer roads for everyone. Your progress will inspire others during the second decade of action for road safety to reduce road crash fatalities by 50% by 2030. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. To. Moving from the global to the national perspective, I'm so pleased to welcome Irene Marion, the Director of the U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of Civil Rights, where she oversees the agency's enforcement of civil rights laws and regulations, which prohibit workplace discrimination in employment and the provision of government services. In this role, Director Marion co-leads the U.S. DOT-wide Equity Task Force and is responsible for strategy and implementation across equity initiatives. This includes initiatives specific to workforce equity, economic justice, gender justice, and public engagement. Recently, the U.S. DOT launched its first Equity Action Plan with the goal of expanding access and opportunity to all communities while focusing on underserved, overburdened, and disadvantaged communities. Director Marion also brings us the local perspective, both within government and in advocacy, most recently serving as Equity and Inclusion Manager for the City of Portland's Bureau of Transportation. We are absolutely thrilled to hear from her today as our keynote. Please join me in giving her a very warm welcome.
New York, New York, good morning. I want to thank the summit planning team, your transportation commissioner, and everyone in leadership who has created this space but also invited me to be a part of this wonderful event. And I want to thank you as transportation partners and practitioners across the city for joining and prioritizing participating in this event. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and of course the New York delegation of our political team, including our Deputy Secretary, Polly Trottenberg, Veronica Vanderpool, Cordell Satcher, Kala Wright, and Joe Jaron, some of whom you'll be hearing from today. And of course, I bring you greetings on behalf of our civil rights organization and our equity teams at the department. But I also want to call in the spirit of our ancestors, those who really have set the stage for the resilience and the DNA that runs through our veins as we really center ourselves on the types of values that are required for the work that we're discussing today. And I want to call in the children and the young people who keep us optimistic and feeling also urgency for all of the solutions that we seek for our future. And of course, I want to call in all the peers, all the colleagues that keep us afloat as we navigate all of these equity challenges and need to just stay afloat in the midst of all of this hard work. This convening is happening at a really critical time. On the one hand, in many ways, it feels like we are battling for the soul of our country. The outcomes of hundreds of years of history is on display. And from my perspective, we are moving through the hard work that requires honesty, healing, and reconciliation through that history. And on the other hand, we have the responsibility to deliver what Secretary Buttigieg will call a once-in-a-generation investment into our transportation sector with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And both of those are intertwined. And both of them are informed in one way or another by the generations of families that are represented here in this room and online, and even more lineages of people who will either benefit or perhaps be harmed by the work that we're facilitating daily in government. I'm starting in this way because when we say that we are equity practitioners and allies, it is important that we continue to center the people in our work. And if we call ourselves equity practitioners, it can either be a calling or a professional title that we hold. The beauty of equity work is that it opens intentional conversation, research, analysis, policy development, program strategy, and recognition that all of those things have not always centered all people. Historically, in transportation, we have prioritized infrastructure and innovations that may not have considered or preemptively solved for systems that are informed by racism and sexism and classism. And the legacy of that impact is what now we have an opportunity to actively address. My entry into this work starts with my roots as a child of the nature island of the Caribbean, but also as a biracial, immigrant girl child raised in the whitest city of America, Portland, Oregon. While I won't go into detail about all of that lived experience, I offer that pretty early in life, I was clear that I was experiencing systems that were not really setting me up for success. By my teens, I found my voice as a young activist, and after years of community activism, I never had imagined I would join the ranks of government. But I got frustrated, and I needed to understand how things were happening and to find opportunities to contribute to systemic change. I have now had 3 critical roles in government that will forever shape my personal and professional development. The first was in the legislative environment on Capitol Hill, where I worked for the Congressional Black Caucus. I served under 2 powerful chairwomen during a season when the CBC was coming into critical leadership roles, and eventually elected the first CBC member to become first Black president of the United States. It was a great time and also a challenging one. Black electeds had to level up in their leadership under new responsibilities. Staff across congressional offices were called to advance and deliver on rigorous and overdue legislative agendas, and advocacy groups were called to engage in new and different strategies to advance their causes. My second stint in government, as you heard, was my first also in transportation. I was hired by the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation as their first ever public engagement coordinator, and I left the organization as their second equity manager. Prior to that role, I was part of a community coalition that advocated for the establishment of what is now the City of Portland's Office of Equity and Human Rights. And we helped to develop and deliver to the city a racial equity toolkit for city government bureaus to implement those strategies. And then as a city employee, I was now tasked with operationalizing new racial equity commitments in the transportation context, challenging city planners and engineers and permitting groups and procurement teams and so many other lines of business to consider how those equity goals should be integrated into their program areas. We deployed equity assessment tools on key transportation programs, discussed and began to account for the role of transportation investments in things like patterns of gentrification, considered how racial equity lens could be applied in asset management. We also created space for community voice and decision-making, including bodies of work like Walking While Black that brought Black perspectives to the citywide pedestrian plan. And then the Black Portland Matters street art initiative that activated resources at the height of the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. When I look back at all of those exciting opportunities, I have to admit it was a lonely experience at the city level. In the early 2010s, there were only a handful of cities and counties that had made racial equity commitments. And it felt like the wild, wild west of this work, and it literally kind of was, because most of those localities were on the West Coast. And just when I thought I couldn't get more challenging, I was invited to consider a position with the Biden-Harris administration. It was daunting because we had just witnessed on the campaign trail all of the heavy commitments that were made. And through the vetting process, it was clear to me that they were looking for talented folks that were not only committed to equity, but had some type of experience doing this work in government. So long story short, here I am, and here are we as colleagues. Inauguration Day in 2021 set an important tone for our tenure. On his first day in office, President Biden signed Executive Order 13985 that focused on a whole-of-government approach to advance racial equity. Secretary Buttigieg appointed myself as civil rights leader and Christopher Coase who is now the acting Undersecretary of Transportation Policy, to co-lead that work. We moved swiftly to connect with career staff and establish an equity task force to get us organized. And it's good that we did, because over the last 3 years, there's been a steady flow of executive orders for us to respond to, including everything from the establishment of the first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality, to elevating a focus on HBCUs, to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce, to Justice 40, which is seeking to maximize climate benefits for environmental justice communities. From assessment of how Title VI compliance in federally funded law enforcement was happening, and also recalling us to strengthen our relationships with tribal nations. All of that while also implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is flowing $65 trillion into the transportation sector. I'm proud to say that we've taken the work head on, and we've delivered on a number of things. With the support of the Secretary and the President, we have doubled the budget and are working towards doubling the staff levelings of our civil rights operations. We have launched an internal equity council, which includes senior leadership that reports directly to the Secretary on all of our equity activities and strategies. We have launched a public federal advisory committee on transportation equity that is chaired by former U.S. DOT Secretary Anthony Foxx, but includes one of your New York City colleagues, Ezekwe Rich, who is bringing his data expertise to their intervention subcommittee. Last week, we announced a final rule change to the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program and the Airport Concessionaire DBE program as well. And then we turned around and hosted a civil rights summit that brought together hundreds of transportation civil rights practitioners to the department for the first time to get trained on all of our strategies and to receive the information they need to support civil rights compliance across our industry. And of course, we are flowing an unprecedented amount of discretionary grants across the country. And there are too many to call out, but two that I'm particularly always excited about include the Reconnecting Communities program and Safe Streets and Roads for All, that are providing new planning resources for community-led planning initiatives, and now beginning to deploy a second round of funding to support construction efforts. We've also established a disability policy priorities, especially with focus in transit, rail, and airspace. And of course, we are funding a lot of research across the country, but we now have a record number of HBCUs and minority-serving institutions that now have 5-year funding streams through our university transportation centers. You'll hear a lot more about that work from our colleagues, Kala and Joe, as they speak on plenary sessions today. But as we open with this day of learning, I want to leave you with some key insights that I have gleaned through my journey in transportation equity. First, I cannot express enough the importance of executive leadership advancing equity in government. You've got a great commissioner here. I can tell that he is passionate, but also activating this work. At the federal level, the President of the United States is issuing executive orders expressing his priorities, providing instructions, and holding us accountable with regular reporting requirements to ensure the work is happening. And at the local level, mayors and city councils and agency CEOs and even department level managers should be doing the same. This is the best way to activate our entire workforce and clarify the roles and accountability strategies for specific outcomes. Secondly, it remains critical that we create real and consistent opportunity for meaningful, accessible, and creative public engagement. This includes leveraging advocacy groups that may show up with specific policy agendas and requests, but also everyday people whose lived experiences are also valuable inputs. These partners are necessary to keep us humble and challenged in this work. It is our responsibility to turn their requests and ideas into technical solutions. And this work takes resources and full-time employees who are serving to serve as liaisons between community and agency offices. Third, it is important to activate subject matter experts across every line of business in the organization. It is not just the equity person's job or the civil rights office job to find all of the solutions for your organizations. Every team should understand the historical context of their work area and what disparities policy and program offices may have contributed over time. Their skills and ideas should be activated to seek solutions that will shift those outcomes. They should be reporting on progress reports to leadership and to the public. These initiatives need dedicated multi-year funding sources so that they are set up for success and not just introduced with no real plan for implementation. Fourth, I want to say that there are plenty of resources available to you as practitioners. At the federal, there are national organizations like the Government Alliance for Racial Equity and Policy Link that provide trainings and tools for government employees doing this work. At the federal level, we now have several resources that we're deploying on everything from meaningful public engagement to resources that you can be bringing into your community activities. We've created new data sets and mapping tools to help support how you strategize around your investments. Our DEIA plan is an example of how we are doing our work, but can be a roadmap for your workforce initiatives as well. I also want to shout out our industry partners at AASHTO and APTA and NACTO and the Transportation Research Board, who now have committees and fellowships and communities of practice that you can be participating in. Fifth, and I'm almost done, I would remind you that allyship is a journey in this work, and it's a personal commitment that we must continue to make. We must be clear about who we are and how we show up in all of these spaces. We need to recognize that we have a responsibility to show up as allies for others and create space for those folks to really lead and contribute to this work. We need to remain in a humble posture of learning from those lived experiences and continue to be active partners for their progress. And lastly, friends, I would say it is time to roll up our sleeves. You're doing a lot of great work here, but these policy commitments that we are making across the industry and across the country are very cute, but they require organizational infrastructure and culture change work to be facilitated. We have provided a blueprint based on how we are activating at the federal level, but there are many cities that have been advancing this work for quite some time, and opportunities for you to be in partnership and learning with them. It is time for us to innovate. It's time for us to set some new trajectories for the future of the transportation industry so that not only safety but equity is a part and at the center of everything we do. I know that everyone here is a partner in this work, and today I call on you to renew your commitments to transportation equity. Listen and learn and engage in all of the dialogues across today's program, build new partnerships, lean into the opportunities for you to show up as an ally to others. Bring some new strategies back to your home offices and colleagues, and of course, reach out if you need advice and support. In the next few years, I know you guys are doing a lot of great things. We don't have any official awards for who are the best and most progressive cities in transportation equity, but I certainly hope that New York will continue to be an outstanding city example of a lot of best practices in transportation equity. So I want to thank you again for having me. Thank you for your work and commitment, and I look forward to the rest of today's conversations.
Thank you so much, Director Marion. Now it is time indeed to roll up our sleeves. Each of us will approach the term transportation equity differently, as a framework, a process, or a means of service delivery. But as we start our day together, how do we create a shared understanding of this term? Today, we're honored to begin that dialogue with transportation leaders who have worked at every level of government, in foundations, and in the private sector. And please allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists for our opening conversation. First, and you're welcome to come on up on the stage as I call your names, Antonio Villaraigosa is a respected voice in American politics and a prominent policymaker known for his skills in building bipartisan coalitions. Mr. Villaraigosa served 2 terms as the mayor of Los Angeles, where he focused on transportation, infrastructure, energy, and resource sustainability, and much more. Currently, he's a partner and co-chair at Actum. Among numerous positions in government, academia, and elected office, in 2022, he was appointed as infrastructure advisor to the state of California, working with local, state, and federal leaders to identify priority projects. Chris Van Eycken, at the end of our panel, is Director of Research and Policy at the Transit Center, a foundation supporting public transit advocacy and research. Mr. Van Eycken's work focuses on encouraging the transit industry to adopt best practices and needed reforms. His work really speaks to the systemic issues impacting the field and actions that can be taken to overcome them. Next to him is Kala Wright, Director of Public Engagement at the U.S. Department of Transportation. In that capacity, she connects with transportation stakeholders from across the country to listen, assist, and advance the goals of the Biden-Harris administration. She joined the administration as Director of External Affairs for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration in July 2021, and previously she's here coming back to New York City because she previously served as Acting Deputy Commissioner at TLC at our Taxi Limousine Commission. We're so pleased to welcome her back to New York. Midori Valdivia, sitting two down here to my left, is the founder and principal of Midori Valdivia Consulting. She is a transportation, operations, and urban planning leader committed to building cities that center people. Previously, Ms. Valdivia led a career in public service, holding numerous senior roles at significant transportation delivery organizations, such as the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Last but certainly not least is Commissioner Sadeo Sherman, New York City's Chief Equity Officer and the Commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice. In these roles, she leads the city's new office, which advances equity through policy, practice, and programs that serve New Yorkers. Commissioner Sherman brings nearly 2 decades of equity-focused community and economic development experience, including as Executive Director of the city's Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity, and as Executive Vice President for Community Engagement and Partnerships at the New York City Housing Authority. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us today. Please give them a warm welcome. So at New York City DOT, we define the goal of transportation equity as one that will be achieved when demographics such as race, income, ability, and language skills, etc., can no longer be used to predict transportation outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. So I'm really curious to learn how all of you are entering the conversation today. When you think about transportation equity, what does that mean to you, and how do you measure that progress? I want to jump in on that first one.
So I'll jump in as the Chief Equity Officer. We define equity as process and outcome, right? So this means that all New Yorkers should have unburdened access to reliable, safe, affordable transportation. But the process for envisioning that transportation, developing that transportation, operating it, right, is also a process that's inclusive. The people who make decisions about that transportation reflect the diversity of New York. The businesses who the city works with, right, to implement also should reflect the diversity of the city of New York. And so by balancing those two, right, we should be able to achieve a transportation system that's more equitable, and also a transportation system that's not only focused on who operates it, who uses it, but also, right, how it impacts our community and how it impacts our environment. And so those are all things that we have to navigate and balance as we plan for transportation in the city.
And Midori, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about this with cities across the country. I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
You know, at the end of the day, and Commissioner Sherman, I think the definition in the city of New York is robust. It makes a lot of sense, and we have to move forward, and I know you're working on that. So I think when I think about equity, one, I think about power, but I also think about our imagination. You know, I'm an urban planner, and so as planners and engineers, we actually have really big imaginations in terms of the big projects that we execute on a daily basis. I'm thinking about incredibly complex, multi-billion-dollar projects, cross-secting jurisdictions and whatnot. But somehow when it comes to our discussion around equity, all of a sudden, everything is scarce, right? This notion that it's going to be really hard to get everyone what they need. And so I think transportation equity really challenges our imagination, the same imagination we have in our engineering space. How do we bring that to kind of to the social space? So that's what I'm left with as I, travel across the country supporting equity work. I'm working on equity frameworks. It's like, wow, in this room, what do we need to do to elevate that level of imagination, assuming that there is buy-in around racial equity, which I can tell you there is not, right? But assuming that there is buy-in, then how do we kind of move on the imagination piece? So that's what I'm left with.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Mayor, I'm curious to hear your perspective, because certainly serving in elected roles for so many years and now in the private sector, I do feel like Midori hits on such a strong point there, that the first step is buy-in. And I know you really had to build buy-in over the years for your various projects. I'm curious to hear from you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me from LA to New York to come and say a few words. I want to thank my friend Commissioner Rodriguez for the leadership that you're providing with respect to this important summit. You know, this equity issue, or DEI, as some people call it, you know, a lot of us cut our teeth in the civil rights movement, talking about opening up the country, making the country all it held itself out to be, a place where we're all supposed to be equal. And so from the very beginning in my public life, you know, I understood that I needed to have a staff that looked like LA. And LA is 70% of color. Before me, I think we never had more than 40% of our, you know, appointees or commissioners of color. And by the time I left, it was 70. And when people asked why, I said, because I want to be relevant to every community in this town. And I think when you look at transportation equity, going down to that issue, you know, who rides the bus? Who rides your trains? When you look, well, obviously planes as well, but when you look at transportation, and particularly here in New York, there's no, this is the system. The rest of us are just trying to catch up. I will say I did more light rail, 3 light rail lines and 1 busway than any mayor in the country in the 8 years I was mayor. We put together about $100 billion over the next 40 years to make those kinds of investments. But when you talk about equity, what I say, it's important that the bus system, as an example, is the same first-class bus system that we want the train system to be. So this issue shouldn't be a controversial issue, as you said. I mean, with too many, it seems to be controversial. It shouldn't be. Every one of us, if you got the talent, ought to be able to work, ought to be able to benefit from these investments. And we're more relevant as, you know, public officials and elected leaders when you know, everybody is able to come to the table.
Thank you. And Kala, I'm really curious, in your work in community engagement, traveling the country, both your own definition of transportation equity and whether that's shifted at all while you've been traveling and meeting with folks all over.
Yeah, yes, Julie, I appreciate that. Thank you for just understanding the experience of shifting from local to federal. You know, I'm always fascinated because Secretary Buttigieg always describes equity as fairness. Like his just simple, eloquent definition is fairness. And, you know, when I think about first working with taxi drivers in New York City and then with truck drivers on the national level, I would say my experience in just working with large groups of people is that equity is more the building from the margins, building, you know, the projects you do, the initiatives you launch, the advisory committees that you might launch from the margins, like cultivating that thinking that, you know, if I start with the least resource group and think about what they need, then I'm going to cover the most people. And so even though that's what my experience has been in, you know, working with large communities of people, that if I build from the margins, I have the most success. So that's how I think I would describe it. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness of whoever your question writer was, because I really had to take a lot of time to reflect and do a little research, because the agency, to Director Marion's point, has spent a lot of time really defining equity equity and setting goals around equity. And so I read through those, and then I said, no, the question says, Kala, what do you think your definition is? And then I had to reflect further. So thank you for the challenge, New York City DOT. I appreciate it.
Thank you to our incredible question writers, Zikwe Rich, who Irene mentioned earlier, and also Paula Ruiz. They did an incredible job. She's over there. Thank you. I really think it's so beautiful how you described building from the margins, and Chris, just picking up sort of for our final definition here of transportation equity. So much of what you do is about identifying where those reforms need to happen and really advocating for them. So is that how you think about transportation equity, building from the margins, or is it something different from you?
Yeah, I think our definition is a little related. We think in terms of, how much of the city can folks that are black and brown or from low-income communities how much of the city can they actually access? How many opportunities can they actually take advantage of? And so we look at that in sort of academic terms. We have a dashboard where we look at how many jobs, how many hospitals, how many community gardens can folks reach in 45 minutes by bus versus the car. And that really gives you an example of how tough it is for folks that don't have the ability to own a car in the city, or just live in a community that was traditionally underinvested in and not connected to really important resources, how disadvantaged they really are and how much less they can access. And so we think about a lot of our equity measures as going beyond just the government processes that say, you can't cause harm when you build something new, but really making sure that those decision-making bodies are planning processes where they're actually repairing past harms and helping folks feel connected and a sense of belonging when they're using a city's transportation system.
Thank you so much. And for me, sort of picking up what you're saying here, transportation is so much about centering the human experience, right? We're both analyzing and looking at our data, but also thinking about from a qualitative perspective, how does someone walk through this space? How does someone bike through this space? And so I'm really curious, we've been thinking about this a lot at City of DOT, about how we build that into our actual infrastructure planning. And so I'm curious, and maybe Midori or Chris, you want to follow up on this point, how have you found that transportation initiatives can be designed to really promote that inclusivity and belonging that you mentioned? And also, something we're thinking about is cultural relevancy. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
I'm happy to take that on. I think you talked about how they can be designed. I kind of want to start with T equals 0. It's how are the priorities decided, right? And I think about, I'm a board member of the MTA. I used to be chief of staff of the MTA, and I see Q out in the audience, who's our chief accessibility officer, and Michael Garner, who was our former chief diversity and inclusion officer. In our capital plan, 2020-2024 capital plan, and I was part of the development of that plan and leading some of those efforts. And accessibility and the notion of elevators and ramps and how we think about wayfinding and design for folks that are from either the disability community, or even parents with strollers, right? Everybody who uses our subway system with a different need or have to have their certain needs met. It wasn't really on the radar. So kudos to the disability community, and this came through also a lot of litigation. So, thinking about, Director Marion asked us to think about not just history, but, from a civil rights perspective. I mean, that's litigation, right? And so that's a real challenge to these institutions. And that also started to build this notion of accessibility. Where does that fit into our transportation system? Where does that, and so kind of that jostling for the priorities as we started to say, wow, we're going to make a huge investment in this. And now you're starting to see that roll out. I see press releases every week. I'm so proud of the MTA for not just putting in scatterable and then delivering on it, right? Because, you got to put your money where your mouth is. And institutions, we suffer from a huge trust gap with communities. We just have to own that. We have a trust gap. And so that means we have to establish trust. I think some people say we have to reestablish trust. No, you have to establish first trust, right? Because those who do not know their history are, right, condemned to repeat it. So I guess I want to challenge, even before we get into inclusive design, it's well, what are our priorities? Who's jostling for it? Who has power to decide on what those priorities are? And I'm proud to have been in the rooms where we said, you know what? Accessibility. Elevators, escalators, and then our disability advocates and people internally push us further. Well, mobility justice is not just about elevators and accessibility. And then it's also about, let's think from a disability perspective about wayfinding, and the MTA has been doing some really incredible work. Q's going to talk about it later, but that's just a highlight of, we can talk about how to make the scope more inclusive, but what's the scope? Let's talk about that first. So that's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. And Chris, do you want to jump in on that, or anyone else on the line?
Yeah, and I would echo Midori's point about who's in the room and who's making decisions. A lot of transit agencies and departments of transportation have leadership and boards that just don't reflect the diversity of their ridership, of the people that walk their streets, of the people that work for them at frontline positions. And it's difficult for an agency to really talk about equity when it's very obvious from sitting down with the community that you just look different from the folks that you're actually planning for. So I encourage agencies to really think through their processes to make sure that folks are coming to communities, not asking communities to come to them when they're instituting their planning processes. And I think of the example of LA Metro's Office of Equity and Race, where they set out to set a whole CBO chartering process. So when they work with community-based organizations, they have a set of rules and guidelines for how they approach those situations. And they actually, at the beginning of every partnership now, they set down a charter that's co-negotiated between LA Metro and that community group, where they set the rules for their engagement with them. And they make sure that it's on the terms that the CBOs can accept and can live with, so that those partnerships are real, they start from a place of trust, and they can continue on into the future with the two parties actually getting benefit from it as a joint proposal, not just something that LA Metro is extracting from the community because the community process says you have to talk to these many groups. It's really making sure that you're including those folks. It's really built into how they do their work, and it's helping them to, it's not perfect obviously, but it's helping them take the first step towards rebuilding trust and really building a community-oriented process that ensures folks feel included and safe when they come to talk to their government agencies.
And Director Wright, I feel like you probably have many thoughts on this issue as Director of Engagement. And I'm just curious to hear, how do you feel like you are working to incorporate voices in these planning processes? How are you seeing cities and localities across the country doing this? And what's working, and where are there opportunities for growth?
I think this is such a critical part of getting anything done in a city or nationally. I would even go to say, if you want your project to finish on time, if you want your project the solution not to be to the left of what you were trying to solve for, if you want a successful project, it is crucial to engage the community. And I feel like there needs to be a multi-leveled outreach plan for this. First, understanding what a community or a group, what the history of that community is with the project that you're trying to launch. Understand what the background is. Meet with the community leaders who have been working on that project for many, many years. Then go to small sessions with advocates around that project, then go to listening sessions, then go to town halls. Trust me on this. And I say that because you really want, not just out of respect for the community, but because the intel and insight that you will gain will really fast track your project. Even if there's resistance, you will understand very clearly what that resistance is, and be able to work with the community more effectively to get things done. I think it's a crucial part of projects. And on the national level, you're pretty much going through the same process, but also you have the opportunity to bring people onto your project with very considerable resources. And so there are those opportunities to partner with government, to partner with private industries, and have them also pushing your goals forward. So I think the process of engaging community, making sure that you are partnering with them, making sure you understand what the history is, it will save you money and time. Ultimately, it's not just a community activity. It is a very practical activity and necessary one if you want to, conduct a successful project, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, community has so much expertise, and in New York City DOT this past couple of years, we've launched a program to pay community-based organizations for their expertise for grassroots organizing, which I've been really grateful for that opportunity. I think some of them are in the room today, so we're really glad to have you here. And Mayor, I was curious, you know, in your extensive experience in government, how have you found the sort of get stuff done, like push to get the infrastructure and make the promises, make true on the promises? Like, how do you balance that with sort of building the political will and the community engagement?
Well, long before I was an assembly member or speaker of the assembly or mayor later on, I was a community organizer and a labor leader for 25 years. So I had come out of it, as I mentioned, the civil rights movement, and I understood that the role of the first was to open up the door for the rest. And so quickly, when I was on the Rapid Transit District in the early 90s, on the MTA board after that, before, they would just have staff do those charrettes and go into the community. I, as a board member, would always attend those meetings, encourage people to speak, and particularly, you know, not everybody speaks English, particularly, you know, multi-language, always engaging these people, empowering them to challenge us. And, you know, as somebody said a few minutes ago, it's not always easy. Sometimes you get challenged and you're saying, well, I got to move this project, you know, and like, this is slowing me down. But, you know, you have to engage those communities, and particularly the ones that have been locked out. The ones that use the system disproportionately, but historically don't have a voice. And I understood that intuitively. I didn't have to be told. I didn't have to have a summit for it. I had come out of the movement, and I understood that that was my role. Later, when I was, you know, chairman of transportation in the assembly, and last year the infrastructure advisor for the IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act for the governor and for the state of California, I think it was surprising to a lot of people that a former speaker, former mayor, would go to, I met with thousands of people from the Mexican border to the Oregon border. We had, you know, something like, you know, 60 different meetings up and down the state. And, you know, hearing from folks that historically hadn't heard from somebody at that level. And so, you know, I think it's critical. And again, you know, you mentioned the word fairness. It's right. It's fair. You know, women are talented. I see a lot of them here. It used to be that in transportation there weren't a whole lot of you, engineers or people participating. There were a lot of people of color here. We can read and write too. You know, we can, you know, we have talent in every single community. So we actually benefit from engaging these communities, from diversifying, from committing ourselves to the notion of fairness.
Absolutely. And I mean, on that note, for me and the team that was working on these great questions, allyship and the concept of how important allyship is to getting things done was really front and center. And so I'm curious to hear from all of you what role you really see as allyship playing in making these policies and initiatives, and particularly in areas with historically marginalized populations. Where can allies be showing up and how? Does anyone jump in on that one?
Me.
Sure. Did you want to?
Go for it,
I'll jump in there just because I think there is somewhat of a special craft to allyship in a regulatory environment, which a lot of us work in, because a lot of times you are pushing rules that the community may not agree with, or you know, just that are not very popular. So I think allyship takes on a different form, and I think the form it takes on is a level of listening, a level of uncommon listening. Like, I really feel like you need to understand the perspective of the community you're working with to such a degree where, you know, where you are in your listening, you're showing respect for that resistance. Like, it has to be at that level. And I feel like people will people really respect, like you become allies by respectfully, being in conflict, and by respectfully saying, we think this is the best thing for the city, even if it's not so much what this group agrees with, but we've had the conversation, we've been willing to be in conflict over it. I just feel like you have to go into those difficult spaces, have the difficult conversations, and in that you are allies. I'm going to give you a heads up on what we're doing. I'm going to, we're going to come up with the best solution together. It's not always an easy relationship, but it's a necessary relationship, and there are necessary truths that need to be shared. And I feel like that's how allyship functions to a degree in a regulatory relationship.
That's powerful, and especially talking about it in the regulatory situation. I really appreciate that. Midori, did you want to jump in?
Everything she said.
And actually, Commissioner Sherman, I'd love to hear a little bit from you. You've done so much organizing in New York within government, and now moving forward, really creating an equity plan for the whole city. How does that work with regards to both pushing our values, but also being good allies within government?
Sure. So, in New York City, for those who may not be aware, as a result of the 2022 election, New York City has a new set of racial equity mandates, which are historic for our city. We have a brand new preamble to our city charter that really outlines the values for a multiracial democracy in New York City. And this is important because at a time in our country where we see lots of resistance to diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, I'm proud to be in a city, right, that has doubled down on this work and is really requiring that the city prioritize racial equity. So we have a new set of foundational values that sort of reset us as a city. And those values are that this is a city that should justly value the talents and contributions of everyone, a city that ensures that every New Yorker, every community has the conditions of thriving, and a city that is vigilant about addressing the harms of the past, right, and making sure that they're remedied. And so every single city agency, including our Department of Transportation, has to carry that into their work, right? And we have to create racial equity plans that reflect that in our work. And we've started that process. We just kicked that off with agency leaders yesterday. And what this means is that the city will have a comprehensive citywide racial equity plan that will certainly have policies and programs and initiatives, but is primarily focused on structural reform of government, right? How we spend our money, where we spend it, who we prioritize, how we allocate how we staff our organizations, who we do business with, how we make rules, right? How we leverage all the unique powers that a city government has, our land use policy, right? Really through a lens of racial equity and with these values at the forefront. And so, we see this as a way of reimagining government. I think we, certainly see this, all of those values intersect for sure with the realm of transportation. And I think if we use this framework, right, not only in the work that we're doing as a city, but in the work that we are all doing in the world of transportation, I think it helps us interrogate the decisions that we make, the questions that we make, to really ensure that we're circling back to how we value people. Are we ensuring thriving? And are we specifically addressing communities that have been harmed, right, and ensuring that there's remedy for it?
Thank you. I mean, equitable project delivery has to be based in these key processes and policies, and I'm so glad we're doing them in New York City. And I'm really curious, we've heard a lot today about making sure our agencies look like our city, that we're hiring folks from all communities in our cities. And Mayor, I know you really value analytics, and so I want to make sure you have a chance to talk about how we not only set the policies up, but then also measure them once we're implementing them, because I think it's the other side that we are living up to our promise.
When I got elected in 2005, after the inauguration, Mayor Bloomberg was there. I went up to my office and my chief of staff said, "Do you know how many campaign promises you made?" And I said, "A lot." She said, "But how many?" I said, "Tell me." I knew she knew. She said, "About 100. And she says, "I want you to meet with McKinsey." And at the time, I thought the person was Ms. McKinsey or Mr. McKinsey. Yeah. I didn't realize it was a management consulting group. But what they did and what they got us to do is to create a culture around metrics. So every campaign promise had a dashboard, had a person responsible, had timelines connected to it. And so when the governor asked me to be his infrastructure, he called it czar, but it was advisor, immediately I said, we're going to put dashboards by everything. Internal dashboards and public external dashboards. And it's important because, you know, particularly with respect to this Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, I was around when President Obama did his initiative around infrastructure. And I could tell you, once the Republicans took over, they took our money. Because, you know, we didn't have enough shovel-ready projects because we weren't working fast enough to move these projects. And so, you know, I think it's really important, particularly around this issue of equity, but really important for everything we do in government, if we want to reimagine it, is to have those metrics, people responsible. I remember when people came into my office, if they had a green, they had a big smile. If they had a yellow, they, you know, came in with a frown. If they had a red, particularly for more than 1 quarter, they came in sweating because we were very clear. We were, you know, I broke a glass ceiling, the first in 133 years, and I knew I had a responsibility. As I said, the role of the first is to open up the door for the rest. I had a responsibility to demonstrate that we could do it. So this issue of equity has to have metrics connected to it, people who are responsible for it, and understand that it's important, that it's as important as anything else we do in government.
Absolutely. And Midori, I'm curious to hear from you as you work with clients across the country. What are some really concrete steps that organizations are taking to prioritize equity, whether that be their staffing or their contractors or whatever it may be?
Yeah, and I'm going to build on what the mayor said, you know, to be able to leave an administration, really having your city government reflect your population is so huge. I felt like we just kind of like jumped over that. It's so significant. And those are the kind of metrics in terms of, you know, diversity and equity that do matter, right? I think you can't manage what you measure, right? And I think, you know, specifically at the MTA, it is something that I personally struggle with. You mentioned, you know, the number of women in the room. I love it. We're at an equity summit, of course, you know, but the MTA has been hovering over a past solid decade at 19% women in our organization. That's pretty standard for actually the rest of the transportation industry. And that's been difficult to see because we'll recruit women and then we'll lose them because, you know, it's a difficult environment to be in. So I think that is something that I have more and more focused on when I meet with cities that are saying, you know, we want to think about an equity framework for our Department of Transportation. So, for example, MetroLink, the Southern Commuter Railroad. Stephanie Wiggins was the CEO at the time. Now she's the CEO of LA Metro. We supported MetroLink in thinking about kind of their equity action plan. And that was really exciting. Some policies around like what does a low-income fare discount look like? What does station accessibility look like? That was really great. But then at the same time saying, but you have to do a lot of internal work. Right? It's easy. Well, it's not easy. It's hard to get a low-income fare discount program out there in the world. But the policies that you shepherd externally, if we're not displaying that internally, then the institution is not at all aligned. And that's when you continue to have that trust gap. So, I have talked much more because I thought, for a long time, there's been so much discussion about MWBE, what does diversity look like, for decades and decades, right? So many impressive people have led that way. And so now people are focused on like, what's the external? What can we do externally? It's like, well, you got a lot of stuff to do internally still, so let's talk about that. And so it's really great to hear these real success stories in other cities and how can we do that internally. So I think that's something that we've been prioritizing more but at the same time, linking the MWBE programs, which the federal government, the US DOT has reaffirmed their commitment on, relinking that to the scopes that we do. If the scopes and the projects are inherently inequitable and are actually addressing past practices or past historical harms, then and an MWBE is forced to work on that. And you're vying for that project. And as an aspiring MWBE, I'll let you all know when I get my certification. As an aspiring MWBE, you just see these firms that have to kind of do these projects that are like a little bit like, that's not right, And so thinking about how do we connect the scopes that the MWBE folks who have, one, lived experiences, real kind of touch base with the community, linkages and connections that the primes do not have, to be perfectly honest. And then linking that to the actual kind of like equity-focused policies. That's where I really want to see that linkage, and that's what I'm interested in doing, that marrying of some of the internal work with the external work. And that's something I've really emphasized for a couple of transit agencies. So, in the West Coast, they're further ahead than us. Yeah. We got to figure that out.
And Commissioner, I'm curious, in the New York City context, as we're starting this equity planning, are there key tools or strategies that you're really, supporting agencies and going after to make sure that they're starting to reach these equity goals?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two pieces of this. One is that the work we do, in part, will be informed, right, by the public and by community members through an independent Commission on Racial Equity, which will share priorities with the city. The other piece of this is that, as I shared earlier, we're looking at agencies to really look at the structures of government, right? So we know that there are amazing initiatives that are happening across our administration. There are lots of amazing efforts underway at DOT. But what we're really looking for agencies to understand is, like, where are you allocating your budget, to which communities, right? Who do you do business with? What is the disparity of the MWBEs that you're contracting with, for instance, right? So that we really start to dig deeper into how we're fundamentally structured as agencies. And this is important. You can't do great work on poor foundations, and racism, inequities, they're baked into our laws, they're baked into our culture, they're baked into our systems of government. Even our best efforts, right, can only go so far unless we fundamentally transform how we operate. And so that's what we're called to do. That's the work that we're called to do through this process. And so there are a number of tools, right, rubrics, tools, lots of, guides that we have to help agencies achieve that. But between that and also incorporating the community input, we hope what we have is almost like a reset, a new foundation for how we do that, right? And we're also asking agencies that their planning teams reflect the diversity of New York. So I'm a New Yorker, lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in Staten Island. I don't know if there's any Staten Islanders in the room. There's always one somewhere. But, I grew up in a neighborhood that's majority people of color, majority Black and Latino community. Staten Island relies heavily on bus service. I grew up in a neighborhood where the buses didn't run 24 hours and they were cut off at weekends, right? Because these were buses that were really designed to bring people from the middle of the island, the South Shore of the island, who were in largely white middle-class communities, to the ferry. They passed through the community I grew up in, right, on their way there. But once the commute is over, right, the transportation needs of the community that I grew up in were not necessarily factored in as important. And this is a community that still, right, is a food desert, does not have a hospital or right? And so when you think about not only the tools that we're going to give agencies and the community input, but also the personal experience that we all have as New Yorkers and how we've understood and understand this city, that we are also asking agencies to bring into this process. And we're fortunate that we're in an administration with incredible diversity. And so we know, and I'm confident, that we'll see that type of personal experience play into our planning process.
Wow, I cannot wait to get into this with you. It's going to be so much fun. Did anyone else want to jump in on that one? Okay. Mary, you touched a little bit on accountability in terms of your dashboards. Are there other examples of accountability that the panelists would like to mention? So I think that, it's great to talk about equity in these spaces, but then how are we actually measuring it? How are we actually being transparent with the public about what's happening?
Well, I do want to say something in terms of the entire spectrum of equity. One of the things we mentioned when I was advising the governor was historically, when you built the freeway as an example, or transportation line, you built them through communities of color. So in the small little area that I grew up in, Boyle Heights on the east side of Los Angeles, 90% Latino, we had 5 freeways. And in South LA, both Latino and African American used to be predominantly or exclusively African American, but now pretty much more Latino, but people of color. They have 3 freeways. And so one of the things we said was, in terms of equity, we're not going to do those kinds of things like we did in the past. In terms of benefits and mitigation, though most of you don't know LA, but there's a street called Santa Monica Boulevard. It was going to be a freeway. And of course, it never ended up being a freeway because it was going to go through affluent neighborhoods, and they stopped it. And when they mitigate in those affluent neighborhoods, they mitigate to the nines. I mean, they do full mitigation. If they mitigate in communities of color, it's usually very substandard. And so what we said was, during my time, both on the MTA board, the RTD board, and later as infrastructure advisor, that ain't going to happen no more. When we mitigate, we're going to mitigate like we do for Beverly Hills. We're going to mitigate in a way that, honors the fact that we've had to build infrastructure through these communities and disrupt those communities. The economic piece here. I love that your mayor, say hello to him for me, please, and you, Commissioner, are committed to this notion that, everybody's got to work and benefit from this kind of investment, not just some groups. And you've set a standard that's a very high standard. When I became mayor, one of the things I said, I was going to make the crane the official bird of Los Angeles. And I was in South LA, and this construction worker, about 6'5", African American, walked all the way to the front of the room where I was at, towered over me, and said to me, "Why would I care about construction cranes if I don't see black people on construction sites?" I grew up on the east side. I felt a little threatened by him getting so close to me, so I moved a couple of inches forward, looked him in the eye, and I said, "If you elect me, you will see him." We did 2,500 black apprentices. We did ex-cons. Well, excuse me, justice served. I love some of the terms that people put on you. Did a lot of justice served people. Women, Latinos were all over the construction industry, but they were laborers. They weren't operating engineers. They weren't pipe fitters. They weren't electricians. They weren't the jobs where your back doesn't go out in the first 20 years. And so we diversified that. So all of those pieces with respect to equity, and then staff. You said 19%. I think the MTA in LA has a lot more than 19%. I think it's.
So we're going to have to talk.
I think we're closer. Well, Stephanie Wiggins is the CEO, and I'm pretty sure we have more. But my staff was almost 60% women and 70% of color, as I mentioned. And we sent Obama 4 assistant U.S. secretaries. The only one that did that was Bloomberg with 4. No governor did that. And all of mine were of color. Wow. Pakistani Muslim is, Homeland Security and public safety, a woman who headed the housing, assistant secretary for housing, a Latina. I mean, we had that equity piece has to be throughout everything. So not just, a couple areas.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk, because you're really saying it's about, in some sense, transparency is building the bench, right? Like the more that we're hiring and allowing people to get into these roles and move their way up the ladder, the more that we're actually being very open in positions of power with people who look like the communities they serve. That's really powerful. Does anyone else want to jump in on that topic before I go to our last question? Good. Okay. So I know we're a little over time. We've been having too much fun here, but we're going to make sure all the panels are the full length. We have a little wiggle room. And so we'll go to the next panel at around 11:15 after you can grab some coffee. But I would love for all of the panelists to just share one piece of advice for the audience to consider how to best center equity in their work to close us out. Anyone want to be brave to start us off?
I'll start us off. I would say be intentional. I think everything from meeting with groups to planning events to advisory boards to everything requires, it just doesn't happen by accident. You have to be very intentional about who you're bringing into a room, who you're inviting. I go as far as to have a checklist just to remind myself and train myself, if I'm planning an engagement for the secretary, I want these people to be in the room, and I want to know who lives in this part of the country, and make sure we have them here. It takes work to do that, and I really feel like it takes just being intentional. And then I feel like because your intentions are to create that space, you will, in fact, create that space. Mm-hmm. Not always perfectly, but you will move the momentum in that direction.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Chris, Midori, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I have one if that's okay. Get proximate. So this is what I would love to say to the people outside of this room. Get proximate. I think you've heard from the commissioner and the mayor lived experiences about how decisions were made in our communities. And, we all have our own story. And so get proximate is what Brian Stevenson, a leader in criminal justice, says, which is I'm an urban planner. We're taught a lot of tools. We're not necessarily taught to go and hang out on the street for a while, talk to some people. This is where the project is. And I know that that's some work that's happening with BQE, but get proximate is something that I very felt seen reading that in the book Just Mercy. Because what would have changed if people were proximate to our communities when we were growing up?
That's beautiful.
If they saw how those bus routes are planned. And we are just building on that legacy because we can't just start from scratch, right? And so that's my advice.
Yeah, beautiful. And a must read if anyone in the audience hasn't read it. Mayor?
Yeah, I love that notion of being intentional. Create a culture from the top down and from the bottom up. I made it clear in my administration that I expected everybody to be able to get a shot. And we created a culture around these issues, which are basic fairness issues. I loved that Pete said that because that's what it is. It shouldn't be a radical notion that everybody ought to be able to work, that talent ought to be able to drive the decisions we make. And there's talent in every single community. And so this notion of intentionality, of creating a culture, of having accountability for the, outcomes, I think is really critical because, you can talk, and at the end of the day, talk is cheap. Ultimately, we're defined by what we do. And so creating a culture around diversity and fairness, but, and outcomes and, accountability.
Great, thank you. Maybe Chris, and then we'll close out with Commissioner.
Yeah, I think Kala's point earlier about bringing the community in early is super important. One, just makes your processes easier, but it also makes sure that folks in communities feel like you're really inviting them into being a part of whatever you're going to do. And it's a good opportunity to get your intentions across and how you're approaching the community really early. It's important that when you come into communities that you don't just invite community leaders to come and talk to you, but really have them part of the process of planning those community engagements very early on, and even have those engagements in their spaces, not yours. So folks feel like they're co-creating something with you and you're not imposing something on them. We don't want our decision-making today to be, the next generation's past mistakes and something that the next panel 20 years from now is talking about correcting.
Yeah, don't want that.
No, I think that's so powerful. I recently had the honor of meeting with the Red Hook Initiative, which is one of our BQE partners, and they really center the youth in the experience of all their work. And so, for me, hearing from these kids, we're doing this survey, and it's the third time that the city has come to us and talked about this, but we're going to do it again because it's for our future. I thought it was a really powerful moment for me, and knowing that we had that responsibility to be stewards for the next generation. So thank you for raising that. Commissioner.
I agree with all my fellow panelists. I think I would say certainly growing majority of our country, and certainly within New York City, and in this area, right, certainly represent those who rely heavily on public transportation, and often, right, due to the patterns of segregation in our city and our country, are cut off from job centers and cultural resources, right? So these are your super users, and this is how you should organize your core business. And so when you begin to think about communities that have been marginalized as your primary customer, that should then be reflected in how you make decisions, how your organization looks and staffs and feels, right? What you prioritize in the work that you do, and you'll start to see a different transportation system take place.
Thank you. I really just want to thank this panel so much for your leadership and energy around this topic. It's a pleasure to talk to you all. And just can we all give them a really warm round of applause?
Un placer, un placer.
So I'll just invite you all to, here, I'll come up here so you can hear better. I'll just invite you all to go grab a coffee, and we'll start our next round of sessions at